Just 2 hours after I'd laid my 8-year-old son to rest, my phone rang, delivering a call that would forever alter the course of my life. His teacher's voice, a barely coherent whisper, trembled with an intensity that threatened to unravel her composure as she implored me, "Ma'am, I've discovered something you absolutely must see for yourself. Please come to the school immediately and meet me in the teacher's lounge. It's crucial that you don't inform your family or anyone else. This situation is extremely perilous." When I finally reached the school, the shadowy figure standing at the entrance sent a shiver of dread from my head to my toes. Never could I have conceived that the person cornering the teacher inside was none other than my own husband. But before we delve into that terrifying revelation, let me begin at the very start. And as the narrator of my channel always used to say, before the story truly unfolds, please drop a comment telling us which city you're listening from. And don't forget to like and subscribe so this gripping tale reaches an even wider audience. 2 hours after consigning my son Zion to his final rest, our home felt like a frozen hell, an icy tomb. The pervasive, cloying scent of lilies and funeral wreaths mingled with the damp earth clinging to the hem of my black dress. People drifted in and out of the living room, their murmurs of condolence sounding hollow and distant, as if their voices were trapped at the bottom of a deep well. They spoke of accepting God's will, assuring me that Zion was now at peace in heaven. Yet, none of those well-meaning phrases could penetrate or soothe the raw, agonizing pain tearing apart my chest, as if someone were ripping it open from the inside. Zion was only 8. He had been a healthy, vivacious boy, constantly on the move, overflowing with an infectious energy. The doctor had attributed his death to a massive heart attack, a rare, anomalous case. I pulled with all my might until I heard the sound of fabric tearing. It didn't matter. The only important thing was getting down. Just as my feet finally touched the muddy grass of the garden, I heard a crashing sound upstairs. Marcellus had broken down the bedroom door. I looked up and saw him framed in the doorway, bathed in the harsh overhead light. He ran to the balcony and leaned out, searching the darkness frantically, cursing loudly. I pressed myself against the tree trunk, holding my breath. A blinding flash of lightning lit up the yard for a second. If he had looked down at that instant, he would have seen me. But the dense curtain of rain made it hard to see, and furious, he went back inside the room, perhaps thinking I was still hiding in there. I didn't waste a second. Barefoot, my feet sinking into the mud, I slipped along the side wall of the house and headed for the back garden gate, the one the gardener used. I knew that as soon as Marcellus discovered I wasn't in the room, he would search the whole house and then come out looking for me. I had to put as much distance as possible between us before he woke the security guards or called any of his powerful contacts. Mr. Sterling had friends everywhere. I no longer knew who I could trust. Every shadow seemed like a lurking enemy. Every tree trunk a menacing figure lying in wait. With my heart racing and tears mixing with the rain on my face, I managed to open the small back gate and stepped out onto the dark path that ran behind the subdivision. There was no one there. I ran without looking back, the recorder clutched tightly in my pocket, until I reached a main avenue about a mile away. My phone, soaked in my pocket, vibrated several times. I assumed it was Marcellus. I refused to answer. I couldn't leave him even the slightest clue of where I was. Taking shelter under the awning of a closed shop, gasping for air, I took out my mobile with fingers numb from the cold. When Marcellus ascended the stage to accept his award, the audience offered a polite round of applause. He gripped the microphone, launching into a rehearsed speech about how profoundly he missed his son, his voice carefully modulated to convey a broken, mournful tone. I gave the prearranged signal to Khalil. The colossal screen behind Marcellus, which moments ago was poised to display an animation of Zion's smiling face, abruptly filled with a jarring static of white noise, followed by a piercing screech that assaulted the speakers. Then, the image shifted to an intense, blood-red background and enormous letters materialized, as if scrawled in gore, "I know what you did." The grand ballroom plunged into an absolute, stunned silence. Marcellus's face went ashen, pallid as a corpse. At that precise moment, We unleashed through the speakers the recording of his depraved conversation with Soraya, the one where he callously referred to Zion as a sickly kid and brazenly boasted about incinerating the poison bottle. The attendees were left utterly agape, jaws dropping in disbelief. Gasps and exclamations rippled through the crowd, chairs scraped back, and indignant murmurs erupted. Soraya lurched to her feet, swaying precariously, on the verge of fainting. Mr. Sterling rose, his face crimson with a mixture of rage and profound shame. Marcellus frantically attempted to regain control of the microphone, shouting that it was all a setup, that they were slandering him, but his desperate voice was utterly swallowed by the surging wave of reproaches and blinding camera flashes. The ultimate blow for Marcellus arrived when he witnessed Mr. Sterling discreetly whisper something to the head of security. In an instant, he grasped their ruthless strategy. They intended to make him the sole scapegoat, abandoning him to face public wrath and preserve the Foundation's image. "You!" Marcellus roared from the stage, his finger jabbing wildly at Sterling. Some time later, I received a summons to the prison hospital, tasked with expanding upon my earlier testimony. As I walked down the sterile, guarded hallway, I glimpsed Marcellus through a reinforced window, slumped in a wheelchair. He was barely a skeletal shadow of his former self, thinner, visibly aged, and his eyes held a profoundly lost, hollow gaze. When he finally registered my presence, he slowly, laboriously turned his head. Our gazes locked one last, poignant time. He began to weep silently, his lips trembling, struggling to form unheard words. Apologies, perhaps, tears that had arrived tragically, hopelessly too late. For the very first time, I felt no hatred towards him, only a serene emptiness, an unbridgeable distance that had grown between us. I held his gaze for a few silent seconds, long enough for him to understand that I was still standing, that I had not only endured, but survived everything he had attempted to destroy. Then I turned, without another word, and continued on my way. There was nothing left to say. 6 months had passed since that tempestuous night on the viaduct. Time, though an agonizingly slow healer, gradually began to close my wounds. The scars remained, indelible marks, but they no longer bled. One crisp morning, beneath a clear, hopeful sky, I looked at my reflection in the mirror of my new home, smaller, simpler than the last, but imbued with an undeniable sense of peace. I donned a soft, cream-colored hijab, smoothing the fabric with firm, steady hands. The woman staring back from the mirror was no longer the broken mother who could barely stand at her son's funeral. She was someone undeniably hardened by tragedy, yes, but also one who had profoundly risen above it. Beside me, a reassuring presence in the reflection, I saw Khalil pass by with a stack of papers, then heard him crack a silly joke, a gentle attempt to lighten the somber mood. That day, the final, irrevocable sentences were to be read. I didn't believe it, but I simply lacked the strength to challenge the diagnosis. I retreated to my bedroom, perching on the edge of the bed, my gaze fixed blankly on a framed photograph where Zion smiled proudly, clutching a track and field trophy between his small hands. Outside, my husband, Marcellus, was receiving and bidding farewell to visitors, his eyes bloodshot, his face swollen, and his shoulders slumped as if he bore the colossal weight of the entire world. Everyone lauded Marcellus's fortitude, proclaiming him an exemplary husband and an admirable father who remained upright solely to support his shattered wife. Through the slightly ajar bedroom door, I saw him embracing Mr. Sterling, the distinguished president of the foundation where Zion attended school. The older man was patting Marcellus firmly on the back, offering comfort with the gentle authority of a father consoling his son. That scene should have moved me, but instead, a wave of inexplicable nausea churned in my stomach. It was then that my phone, resting innocently on the quilt, began to vibrate. The illuminated screen displayed the name, Miss Vanna, Zion's teacher. I frowned. Why was she calling me at a time like this? She had been at the funeral. I had seen her weeping by the casket myself. With a hand that trembled uncontrollably, I slid my finger over the green button and brought the phone to my ear. The voice on the other end was so hushed it sounded like a whisper, suffocated by fear. Miss Vanna's breathing was ragged, strained, as if she were desperately hiding in a cramped, dark closet. She urged me to listen carefully, explaining she couldn't repeat herself. She claimed to have discovered something I absolutely needed to witness with my own eyes, something forgotten in the drawer of Zion's desk. Her voice cracked as she pleaded with me to come to the school immediately and wait for her in the teacher's lounge. I saw 10 missed calls from Marcellus. I ignored them and desperately searched for a name in my contact list, Khalil, my best friend since high school, the only person I could possibly trust, an investigative journalist, stubborn and accustomed to dealing with dirty, dangerous cases. I dialed his number with shaking hands, praying he wasn't asleep. It rang a couple of times, and then I heard his sleepy voice. Amara, what happened? I couldn't give too many explanations. With my voice broken by crying, I barely managed to whisper, Khalil, help me. Marcellus killed Zion. I'm near the gas station on the highway. Come get me. Don't ask anything right now. Just come fast. I hung up before he could react and turned off the phone, severing any chance of being tracked. I huddled into a dark, secluded corner beside the shop's metal shutter, my arms wrapped tightly around my knees, trembling uncontrollably from a cocktail of fear and the biting cold. My desperate hope was that Khalil would appear before Marcellus could hunt me down. Those 15 minutes stretched into an eternity, each tick of the clock feeling like a year. Every approaching car light sent a jolt through my chest, my heart momentarily seizing as I braced myself for the sight of Marcellus's menacing black SUV. Finally, however, an old, unassuming gray sedan glided to a stop directly in front of me. The passenger side window were down, revealing Khalil's deeply etched, worried face. Without a word, I sprang to my feet and practically dove into the car, slamming the door shut behind me. I must have presented a truly pathetic sight, drenched, smeared with mud, a complete wreck. My hands were scraped raw, and my face was ashen, ghost-like. Khalil shot me a swift, discerning glance. He instantly grasped the gravity of the situation and floored the accelerator, speeding away without uttering a single question. Inside the car, the sudden blast of the heater only intensified my shivers. It was you who orchestrated everything. The inheritance, splitting the money, the poison. If I go down, you're coming down with me. That explosive accusation, captured by 100 cell phones and every TV camera present, would be utterly impossible to retract or erase. The gala devolved into utter chaos. Marcellus, desperate, fled through a service exit, pursued by a ravenous pack of journalists. Sterling, attempting to regain control, found his efforts futile. The scandal had already exploded across social media. The incriminating video went viral within a matter of hours. Yet, we both knew it still wasn't enough. Lawyers, we reasoned, could argue temporary stress, delusion, or even a sophisticated digital deepfake. We needed a definitive, undeniable scene, both men describing their crimes in their own words, to an official ear. That night, we returned to the apartment, devoid of any celebratory mood. We understood a wounded animal is exponentially more dangerous. Marcellus was now a social pariah, but still a free man. Sterling was cornered, yet still commanded immense resources. The next phase of our plan hinged on sowing absolute discord between them, meticulously turning them against each other by making each believe the other was preparing a betrayal. Khalil procured 2 untraceable burner phones. On one, masquerading as Marcellus, we texted Sterling, I have signed copies of all the asset diversion papers. If you don't help me get out of the city tonight and give me my share, they go to the district attorney tomorrow. Meet me at the Foundation's old warehouse at the docks at 2 a.m., alone, or we sink together. We were certain Sterling, with his inherent paranoia, would not dare disregard such a direct threat. On the other phone, posing as an emissary for Sterling, we dispatched a message to Marcellus. Mr. Sterling wants to resolve this. He has arranged a boat to get you out of the country tonight. The courtroom was packed, teeming with journalists, impassioned representatives of children's associations, and curious onlookers. The atmosphere hung heavy, thick with anticipation. I took my seat in the front row. Khalil, impeccably dressed in a suit, his arm now fully recovered, settled in beside me and gently took my hand. Then, the judges entered the chamber and the low murmurs instantly ceased. 2 officers wheeled Marcellus's chair to the defendant's bench. His head was bowed, his gaze fixed on the floor. The adjacent bench remained conspicuously empty. Sterling's lawyer represented him, as the old man was no longer capable of movement. Further back, in another chair, Soraya sat trembling, her face pale and drawn. The prosecutor delivered a firm, concise review of all the damning charges: aggravated homicide against a minor, the cold-blooded murder of a key witness, widespread corruption, and extensive money laundering. The head judge, a middle-aged woman with severe, uncompromising eyes, began to read the court's resolution. A reverent silence enveloped the room. Her words, though delivered formally, carried the undeniable force and ripple effect of a stone cast into still water. She declared Marcellus guilty on all counts, and explicitly underlining the profound cruelty and premeditation of his acts, she dictated the maximum penalty possible: death. Gasps rippled through the courtroom, hushed exclamations, and a barely contained "thank God" could be heard from the back of the room. Marcellus began to visibly tremble. He then completely broke down, crying with an ugly, desperate sob that elicited no sympathy from anyone present. Mr. Sterling was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The judge explicitly noted that despite his failing health, his moral and legal responsibility in the crimes was absolute. His broken body would spend the remainder of his days confined to a prison infirmary bed. She emphasized a condition that sent a chill through my veins. I was not to tell anyone, not even my own family. She reiterated that it was dangerous, that I couldn't trust anyone but her. My heart began to pound with an uncontrolled, frantic rhythm. The grief that had paralyzed me suddenly transformed into a sharp, searing alert that pierced through the suffocating fog of pain. There was something urgent, something sinister connected to my son. I felt it in the way Vanna breathed on the other end of the line, in the contained desperation of her hushed words. My mother's instinct, which until then had only battered against a wall of helplessness in the face of death, now ignited with brutal clarity. I wiped my tears away with the back of my hand, forced myself to stand, and took a deep, fortifying breath. I had to go. I had to know what was so dangerous about her discovery. I walked out of the room, dragging my feet, feigning a fatigue even heavier than what I truly felt. I approached Marcellus, who was still conversing with Mr. Sterling on the porch. I whispered that I had a terrible headache, that I needed to go to the corner store for my migraine medication, having left it in the car, and that I craved some fresh air. Marcellus looked at me with a tenderness that would have convinced anyone. He offered to go in my place, but I gently demurred, insisting I needed 15 minutes alone to clear my head. Mr. Sterling smiled, advising me not to linger too long, cautioning that the night breeze wasn't good for someone feeling so weak. I agreed with a nod and made my way toward my car. As I drove toward Zion's school, the city seemed to stretch out into an endless, blurring expanse. A fine drizzle began to fall, making the asphalt gleam with the yellowish reflections of the streetlights. My mind was a relentless whirlwind of questions. What had Vanna found? Why was she so terrified? And why had she forbidden me from speaking to Marcellus? It wasn't merely the external cold. It was my body finally shedding the immense burden of adrenaline. Khalil reached into the back seat, retrieved his jacket, and gently draped it over my trembling shoulders. He navigated the car with one hand, while the other firmly clasped mine, a silent effort to impart a sense of calm. Through chattering teeth, I began to recount everything: Miss Vanna's desperate call, the horrifying scene at the school, Marcellus's insidious double life, and finally, the crucial recording secreted inside Zion's teddy bear. Each word felt like spitting shards of broken glass. As I played the audio, he immediately pulled the car over to the curb, listening with profound intensity. His face underwent a chilling transformation as the damning sentences from Marcellus and Mr. Sterling emanated from the tiny device. When the recording concluded, He slammed his fist onto the steering wheel in a furious outburst, unleashing a torrent of curses aimed at both Marcellus and Sterling. Then, with a journalist's detached, analytical mind, he listened to the recording once more. He confirmed it was incredibly potent evidence, yet cautioned it was also fraught with extreme danger. Mr. Sterling, he reminded me, was no ordinary citizen. He wielded significant political influence, maintained connections within the police force, and undoubtedly commanded an arsenal of high-priced lawyers. Simply walking into a local precinct, he argued, could lead to the recorder mysteriously vanishing, or, far worse, they could silence us permanently before we ever had the chance to speak. He resolved to take me to a safe haven, a modest apartment on the city's outskirts, a property of his late uncle, a place so discreet that even his own family was unaware he occasionally still used it. That humble apartment would henceforth serve as both our sanctuary and our operational headquarters. He requires you to bring all the documents and evidence you possess for immediate destruction. He awaits you at 2 a.m. at the Foundation's old warehouse at the docks. The police are already mobilizing. It's now or never. Do not be late. Marcellus, isolated, desperate, bereft of allies, and utterly convinced that the entire world was closing in on him, would undoubtedly perceive this message as his final, fleeting lifeline. At 2 a.m., amidst a fierce downpour, Khalil and I were already ensconced inside the warehouse, perched on a metal loft on the second floor, affording us a perfect, unobstructed view of the main space below. It was a cavernous, abandoned structure near the pier, redolent with the tang of rust and stale seawater. Khalil had discreetly positioned hidden cameras and microphones, all connected to a secure server accessible by one of his contacts within the Major Crimes Unit. This time, the police were officially in the loop. They were fully aware that two dangerous men were meeting there to discuss illicit funds. All they had to do was wait for them to incriminate themselves sufficiently, then make their move. A sleek black sedan was the first to arrive. We watched Sterling emerge, clutching a briefcase, flanked by two formidable bodyguards. He waved them off, signaling them to remain outside. He then strode into the warehouse, his right hand conspicuously tucked inside his jacket. It wasn't difficult to surmise he was gripping a weapon. His face was a mask of stone, taut with a potent blend of rage and fear. Minutes later, the large door groaned open again. Marcellus stumbled in from the enveloping darkness. He wore a crumpled shirt, his gaze vacant and distant. He appeared to have aged a decade in just 2 days. He advanced towards Sterling, a volatile mix of desperate hope and seething hatred warring on his face. "Where's the boat?" he demanded, his voice hoarse and broken. "You said you'd get me out of here." The tribunal sentenced Soraya to 20 years in prison. When the judge struck the gavel 3 resounding times, I felt something within me finally, irrevocably close. The legal chapter of our nightmare had at last concluded. Stepping out of the courthouse, the fresh air of the street tasted profoundly different. It wasn't absolute freedom, for nothing could ever bring Zion back, but it was a crucial first step toward a life where my son was no longer merely a victim, but also a precious seed of something profoundly good. All the money implicated in my father's inheritance and in Marcellus and Sterling's vast criminal schemes was ultimately recovered after a long, arduous legal process, one in which Khalil worked tirelessly, practically working his fingers to the bone. The state initially intended to claim a substantial portion, but we successfully managed to prove that it constituted Zion's rightful patrimony. Even so, I knew with absolute clarity that I could not keep that money for myself. I saw it as irrevocably stained with blood. Instead, I resolved to transform it into something that would truly honor my son's memory. We located an old, dilapidated building on the city's outskirts and undertook a complete, transformative remodeling. At the entrance, we proudly hung a colorful, vibrant sign. Zion's House, a foundation for child protection and education. My vision was for that place to become a sanctuary, a true refuge for abused, mistreated, or abandoned children, those whom no one had ever believed or truly listened to. A place where they could sleep without fear, pursue their studies, play freely, and find support from caring psychologists, dedicated teachers, and genuine affection. I walked through the freshly painted halls, now brightly adorned with colorful children's drawings. In the sunny courtyard, a joyful group of kids played soccer, while others took turns soaring on the swings. Until that moment, he had been an exemplary father, attentive, patient, utterly devoted. I repeated to myself over and over that he couldn't possibly be involved in anything dangerous. Yet, a small, insidious seed of doubt began to sprout, slow and stubborn, like roots cracking through solid cement. Scenes from the past few months, which I had deliberately avoided examining too closely, now rushed back with startling clarity. Zion's recurring stomachaches, his sudden bouts of fatigue, the afternoons he'd fallen asleep in various corners of the house. I remembered how Marcellus had insisted on personally administering his medicines, and how furious he became when I suggested taking the boy to a doctor other than our family physician, that distant cousin of Mr. Sterling, who, according to them, knew Zion's history better than anyone. All of it, which until then had simply been background noise, began to align in my memory like the pieces of a sinister, unfolding puzzle. The school looked ominous under the cloak of night. The main gate stood ajar, as if someone had deliberately left it that way. I didn't see the security guard in his booth, perhaps he was making rounds. Or perhaps there was simply no night shift, with classes suspended following Zion's death. I parked the car far away, beneath the voluminous shadow of a massive oak tree, ensuring no one would recognize the vehicle from the street. I ran across the courtyard under the intensifying drizzle, my heart hammering in my throat, and headed toward the building where the teacher's lounge was located on the second floor. The hallway on that floor was plunged into complete darkness, illuminated only by the faint, diffused light rising from the exterior gardens. However, I could distinguish a thin thread of light escaping from the bottom crack of the lounge door. It was open a few inches. Vanna must be inside. I quickened my pace, but the closer I got, the more oppressive the air became. During our journey, Khalil switched on the radio, perhaps seeking to shatter the oppressive silence that filled the car. Initially, mundane traffic reports filled the air, until an announcer abruptly cut in with an urgent news bulletin. The lifeless body of a woman has been discovered in the courtyard of an elementary school on Magnolia Street. The victim has been identified as a teacher, initials V.S. Preliminary hypotheses suggest a possible suicide, following a jump from the third floor of the school building. I felt the blood drain from my veins, my entire circulation seeming to halt. A raw, guttural scream tore from my throat within the confines of the car. Vanna, they killed her. I choked out, dissolving into wrenching sobs. Marcellus and Mr. Sterling murdered her, and now they're framing it as suicide. A tidal wave of guilt crashed over me, whipping me with a ferocity far more brutal than any physical assault. If only I had left earlier, if only I had attempted to pull her out of that school with me, perhaps she would still be alive. But instead, I had abandoned her there, utterly alone, at the mercy of those monsters. My entire body convulsed with grief, slamming repeatedly against the dashboard. Khalil, witnessing my agony, pulled the car over, killed the engine, and held me in a tight embrace, allowing me to unleash that unbearable pain. Amidst my uncontrollable sobs, something profound shifted within me. The pain, rather than continuing to crush me, began to coalesce, hardening into a cold, razor-sharp determination. My tears abruptly ceased. I pulled away from Khalil and fixed my gaze on the dark, unforgiving road stretching ahead. I recalled Vanna's final, desperate look when she whispered, "Run." Her death could not be in vain. Nor could Zion's. It wasn't enough for Marcellus and Sterling to simply face prison. No, that would be far too easy for them. They needed to experience true fear, utter helplessness, and profound shame. Sterling let out a dry, contemptuous laugh. "Boat? Do you truly believe, after your utterly disgraceful performance at the hotel, that I would ever assist your escape? You publicly humiliated me in front of everyone. You are nothing but a massive liability." Marcellus stared at him, his expression morphing into disbelief. "But you sent me a message." I sent you nothing. Sterling interjected, his voice sharp with menace. The only message I received was yours, threatening me with documents. You brought them, didn't you? Hand them over, and perhaps I'll consider letting your corpse show up whole, rather than in pieces and plastic bags. Marcellus's confusion rapidly curdled into incandescent fury. He understood now that a third party was manipulating them, yet his burning hatred for Sterling eclipsed his very instinct for survival. So, you're going to kill me just like we killed Zion? He spat, venom lacing every word. Go ahead. But remember, you are just as responsible as I am. You supplied the poison. You instructed me to increase the dose. You did it all to cover your monstrous gambling debts. Don't you dare point fingers at me. You were the father. Sterling roared, his voice booming through the cavernous space. You were the one who put the poison in his mouth every single night. I merely advised you to resolve the inheritance issue. Don't play the saint, you old hypocrite. Marcellus screamed back, his voice raw with rage. We're cut from the same rotten cloth. Every single damning word was being meticulously recorded by the hidden microphones and broadcast live to Khalil's police contact. There was no longer any room for misinterpretation. There they stood, unequivocally admitting their heinous participation in the murder of a child and the brazen embezzlement of funds. Suddenly, Sterling brandished a gun, swiftly leveling it at Marcellus's head. It's over. Goodbye, you useless fool. Their unrestrained laughter resonated like a warm, comforting echo within my chest. In the main lobby, we prominently displayed a large, beautiful photograph of Zion smiling, and right beside it, an equally touching one of Miss Vanna. With another portion of the funds, we also financed the extensive renovation of the school where she had taught, including the creation of a brand new library, proudly named the Vanna Library. This ensured her name would forever be associated with education and light, rather than with tragedy. As evening drew in, when the setting sun began to paint the sky in hues of soft orange, Khalil and I made our way to the cemetery. Zion's and Vanna's graves lay side by side, nestled beneath the gentle shade of a magnolia tree, its fragrant white flowers leaning protectively over their resting places. The grass was verdant and meticulously kept, adorned with fresh flowers that anonymous well-wishers left from time to time. I knelt before Zion's headstone, my fingers tracing the letters of his name carved into the cool marble. This time, there was no despair in my eyes, none of the crushing sorrow from before. There was nostalgia, yes, but it was profoundly mixed with a new sense of peace. It's done, my love, I whispered, my voice soft. We found justice. They won't hurt anyone ever again. Your money now serves to keep other children safe. You don't have to feel pain anymore, my sweet. You can play all you want up there. The wind gently stirred the branches of the magnolia tree, and a few delicate white petals drifted down onto the grave. I closed my eyes and prayed, long and deeply, offering God my gratitude, my enduring grief, and the precious entirety of my son's life. When I finished, I slowly stood up. And that was when I saw something truly extraordinary at the very end of the gravel path. Approximately 30 feet away, bathed in the ethereal golden light of the setting sun, the clear silhouette of a boy emerged. My entire body screamed that something was terribly wrong. The silence was so thick that only my footsteps, amplified by the tiled floor, could be heard. Zion's voice came to mind, telling me how affectionate Miss Vanna was, how much he loved her. If she had reached this depth of fear, it had to be something profoundly serious. I stopped in front of the half-open door and held my breath before cautiously peeking inside. What I saw paralyzed my heart. Miss Vanna was cornered near the filing cabinets, her face ashen, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror, her whole body trembling like a leaf. Her hands were raised in a gesture of frantic pleading, as if begging for mercy. In front of her, with his back to me, stood a man in a black shirt, a figure I knew all too well. His posture, the subtle way he shifted his weight onto one leg, even the faint, familiar scent of his cologne drifting into the hallway, it was all unbearably recognizable. The man held a small, black object in his hand, a device that looked like a USB drive or a portable disk. He was speaking to Vanna in a low, menacing tone, a cold, sharp voice devoid of any affection. It was a voice so utterly different from the one I heard every day at home that for a second, I simply refused to believe it. I pushed the door gently. The hinges creaked, betraying my presence. The man spun around instantly, acutely alert, and the stark white neon light illuminated his face fully. My legs went weak, and I had to grab the doorframe to prevent myself from collapsing. It was Marcellus, my husband, the father of my newly buried son. Marcellus looked at me without a hint of surprise, as if he had calculated from the very beginning the possibility that I might show up there. His expression, which a moment before had been pure ice, slowly transformed into a mask of contained pain, the same one he had worn all day in front of family and friends. They had to witness their own lives utterly obliterated, just as they had so carelessly destroyed mine. I turned to Khalil, my eyes burning with this newfound, chilling resolve. I articulated my desires with a terrifying calmness, a calmness that even startled me. I no longer sought mere legal justice. I wanted to utterly dismantle those men's lives, to tear them down to their very roots. I wanted them to choke on the same terror they had forced Zion and Vanna to endure. Khalil held my unwavering gaze for several long seconds, then nodded silently, a solemn acceptance of the dark pact that now bound us. We agreed not to approach the police just yet. Before that, we needed to amass more evidence, something so indisputable that neither their influence nor their expensive lawyers could ever discredit it. The recording, potent as it was, could potentially be dismissed as a fabrication. Our objective was to retrieve the bottle of poison Marcellus had used on Zion, the irrefutable physical proof of the crime. We were confident he wouldn't destroy it immediately, either out of sheer vanity, an overconfident belief in his own impunity, or simply through sheer carelessness. That night, within the confines of the dusty, humble apartment, we shed our roles as victims and embraced our new identities as hunters. I sheared my long hair to shoulder length, discarded the torn black dress that clung to my former self, and donned simple, practical clothes that had once belonged to Khalil's uncle. The submissive Amara, the docile wife, had perished along with my son. Dawn was just beginning to paint the sky when we sat down to meticulously plan my re-entry into that viper's nest, not as a repentant wife, but as an avenging phantom, hell-bent on unearthing their deepest secrets. We knew Marcellus held the position of Director of Operations within the corporate building of Sterling's Foundation. Every Friday, an external cleaning company conducted a thorough deep clean of the offices. Before he could pull the trigger, the piercing wail of police sirens tore through the night's silence. Red and blue flashing lights filtered through every crack and crevice of the warehouse. A booming voice over a megaphone ordered them to drop their weapons and surrender. Sterling flinched, his gaze darting towards the entrance. Marcellus seized that split-second distraction, lunging at him with savage force. The two men tumbled to the grimy floor, grappling furiously. The gun skittered across the concrete, coming to rest in a distant corner, well beyond their immediate reach. From our concealed vantage point, we watched the brutal, desperate fight unfold. Marcellus, younger and demonstrably stronger, landed blow after relentless blow until he rendered Sterling unconscious. Yet, he harbored no intention of surrendering himself. He scrambled to his feet, unsteady, frantically scanning the perimeter for any possible exit. His eyes, wild and desperate, darted upwards, finally settling on the metal loft where we were hidden. A telltale glint from a camera lens betrayed our presence. Our gazes locked. For the first time since I had fled our home, Marcellus truly saw me. My dark blue hijab had slipped, revealing my face, which his features twisted into a grotesque grimace of absolute, unbridled hatred. "Amara!" he roared, a guttural sound of recognition, finally identifying the specter that had been haunting him. Driven by a crazed, animalistic fury, he charged up the stairs, utterly oblivious to the shouts of the police officers who were already pouring into the warehouse through another door. Khalil seized my arm. "Run," he commanded. Through the roof door. We burst out onto the warehouse roof, instantly deluged by torrential rain. The ferocious wind threatened to sweep us off our feet. From our elevated position, we could discern the pier below and the flashing lights of several squad cars. He was wearing pajamas adorned with Zion's favorite superhero, the exact same outfit I had put on him the last night he spent at home. His hair was playfully messy, and his eyes were as bright and sparkling as I always remembered them. He didn't look sick or tired, quite the opposite. He radiated vibrant health and pure joy. I felt no trace of fear. He looked at me with an enormous, radiant smile, so luminous it almost brought tears to my eyes. He raised his right hand and offered a small, gentle wave. A goodbye. And a silent message, *I'm okay, Mom. *A single, solitary tear traced a path down my cheek. I returned his wave with a trembling hand and a smile that, for the first time in an impossibly long time, felt genuinely sincere. "See you soon, sweetie," I murmured, my voice thick with emotion. Zion's radiant figure gradually faded with the diminishing light of the setting sun until he completely disappeared, but the profound warmth he left in my chest remained, a comforting ember. He was at peace. I could finally, truly accept that I would never physically hug him again, but also, crucially, that he was no longer suffering. I turned around. Khalil was waiting a few steps back, his silent presence a testament to the patient understanding he had always shown me. He simply held out his hand. I took it firmly. We walked out of the cemetery side by side, leaving behind years of agonizing pain, paralyzing fear, and crushing guilt. Before me, the city began to illuminate its lights one by one, as if a new, hopeful curtain were slowly rising. I had an entire life stretching ahead, now dedicated to countless children who would need protection, to untold stories that deserved to be heard, and to profound wounds that perhaps, with time, I could help to heal. I was no longer merely the mother who had lost her son, nor simply the betrayed wife. He deftly disguised the black device, sliding it to his side, attempting to conceal it from my view. I looked at Vanna, who was now weeping silently, her lips trembling, her hands still raised in supplication. My mind simply refused to comprehend. Marcellus was supposed to be at home, receiving mourners, weeping with me. What was he doing here? Why was he threatening our son's teacher? What crucial information was contained in that device? The silence became suffocating. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner and Vanna's slight, stifled sobs. Marcellus broke the tension, approaching me with a measured, calm stride, like someone standing before a frightened animal, attempting to soothe it. His face shifted again, becoming that of a fragile husband, utterly broken by grief. He opened his arms as if to embrace me, and with a raspy voice, said he hadn't expected me to come to the school. He claimed he had only come because he couldn't bear being at home, surrounded by Zion's memories. He claimed he had gone to collect the boys' things, wanting to keep them safe before the cleaning crew emptied the desks the next day. His explanation sounded reasonable, almost touching, and if I hadn't witnessed the chilling scene from just a few seconds earlier, I might have collapsed into his arms without questioning a thing. But the image of Vanna, cornered, with fear etched in her eyes, remained stubbornly lodged in my brain. I sought the teacher's gaze. I needed confirmation, a sliver of truth amidst so many calculated lies. Vanna was shaking visibly. Her eyes darted frantically from Marcellus to me, as if she were trapped at a deadly crossroads. When Marcellus glanced at her sideways with that threatening glint I had never seen before, she hurried to nod. With a voice that was clearly broken, she confirmed his version. Yes, Marcellus came to get Zion's things. We were just remembering what a good boy he was. I knew she was lying. This, we determined, would be my infiltration point. Khalil, an undeniable expert in covert entry, skillfully hacked into the cleaning company's system and seamlessly registered me onto their temporary staff list under a fabricated identity. He transformed me into Sad Day, a maintenance worker complete with forged credentials and an official uniform. Standing before the bathroom mirror in the apartment, I meticulously tied a dark blue hijab, one of those practical designs favored by women enduring long work shifts, and pulled on the light blue uniform, which hung slightly too large on my frame. I added thick-rimmed glasses and deliberately powdered my face unevenly, effectively dulling my features and erasing any hint of my former self. The reflection staring back was no longer Amara, it was a stranger. Khalil parked the car 2 blocks from the Foundation's imposing corporate building. I exited, pushing a utility cart laden with buckets, brooms, and mops, effortlessly blending in with the stream of other cleaning staff funneling through the service entrance. The guard at the door barely afforded us a glance. He didn't even bother to look up and register our faces. We, the people existing at the bottom rung of society, are often truly invisible. I navigated the security checkpoint without a hitch, using the cloned access card Khalil had ingeniously fabricated from a careless employee's original. Then, I took the freight elevator, ascending to the 12th floor, where Marcellus's office awaited. The hallway was plushly carpeted, eerily silent, and permeated by a cold, sterile air. I pushed my cart towards the imposing double doors marked Director of Operations. I swiped the cloned card through the reader. The light flashed green, and with a soft click, the lock disengaged. I stepped inside. The office was sprawling and exquisitely appointed, boasting dark wood furniture and an expansive window offering a panoramic view of the city below. On the opposite side of the building, a metal fire escape spiraled down to a landing. We scrambled towards it, but then the roof door exploded open with a violent kick. Marcellus appeared, a metal bar clutched in his hand, blood streaming from a gash on his head, his eyes wide and utterly feral. Khalil immediately stepped forward, attempting to block him. Marcellus, with a feral grunt, swung the metal bar down with brutal force, striking Khalil's arm. I heard a sickening crack. Khalil crumpled to the ground, screaming in agony, clutching his arm, which now hung at an unnatural angle. I started to run towards him, but Marcellus lunged, grabbing my hijab and yanking me backward with such violence that my scalp felt as if it had caught fire. He dragged me mercilessly towards the edge of the roof, effectively using me as a human shield as he spotted several officers attempting to ascend from the other side. "One more step and I throw her," he shrieked, pressing the cold metal bar hard against my neck. The officers froze. The relentless rain drenched us all. I struggled to breathe, feeling the unforgiving metal at my throat, yet a strange calm had replaced my fear. I was done with being afraid. Marcellus violently forced me down the precarious fire escape. We reached an old, battered SUV parked amidst a cluster of shipping containers, undoubtedly stolen. He shoved me into the passenger seat, roughly binding my hands to the roof handle with his own tie, then slid behind the wheel. He screeched out of the makeshift parking spot like a madman, tearing down the fence and careened onto the avenue, a swarm of police cruisers immediately hot on our tail. The police cars pursued relentlessly, sirens wailing their urgent warning. Marcellus drove with a terrifying disregard for both his life and mine. He blew through red lights, clipped the mirrors of unsuspecting cars, and slammed into puddles, sending us skidding precariously across the wet pavement. I was Amara, the woman who had walked through the heart of the storm and remained standing, the proud founder of Zion's house and a fierce defender of children who had no voice of their own. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, as I contemplated the future, I could quietly say to myself, yes. The cold sweat glistening on her temple, her fingers gripping the hem of her skirt until her knuckles turned stark white, it all betrayed her. Marcellus slid his arm around my shoulders and squeezed too hard, with an insistence that actually hurt. He said we should return home, that it wasn't good for me to be in a place that only reopened the wound for so long. On the table lay a cardboard box filled with drawings, notebooks, and some of Zion's pencils. With an almost imperceptible gesture, Marcellus tucked the small black object into his pants pocket. He thought I wouldn't notice, but I saw it clearly. Before leaving, he moved toward the door first. In that minimal instant, Vanna rushed toward me. She pretended to fix my hijab, which was slightly crooked from the rain, and her freezing fingers grazed my neck. I felt her slide something inside the fold of the fabric near my shoulder. Her eyes locked onto mine. In them, I saw a desperate plea and an urgent, silent warning. Her lips moved without making a sound, but I could clearly read the words she articulated. Run. My heart raced. I forced myself to appear calm. I nodded as if thanking her for the gesture and took a step back. Marcellus turned around, watching us with a certain, subtle suspicion. He asked what we were saying. I answered quickly that Vanna was just asking me to be strong, to pray, and to take care of my health. He seemed convinced. He took my hand, and we left the room, leaving Vanna behind, alone in the middle of that silent space, rigid as a wax statue, on the verge of melting from the sheer heat of her fear. The drive back was a journey toward an invisible execution. Marcellus drove with studied calm, wiping his eyes every now and then, like someone drying feigned tears. He put on classical music at a low volume, the same kind he used to listen to when he wanted to relax. But to me, it sounded like the funeral march of my own grim destiny. On the wall directly behind the desk hung a photograph of us, Marcellus, Zion, and me, all smiling in a park. An intense urge to tear it down with my bare hands seized me. I knew, not from genuine affection but from a fleeting accidental glimpse, that Marcellus displayed that photo purely as part of his elaborate facade as an exemplary family man. I also knew that behind an abstract painting on an adjacent wall, a hidden safe lay concealed. I carefully removed the painting, revealing the sleek digital panel. I swallowed hard, a lump forming in my throat. The code, in a twisted, stomach-churning irony, was Zion's date of birth. I punched in 1703, and the green light glowed reassuringly. I opened the safe, fully expecting to find the elusive bottle of poison. It wasn't there. Instead, I found thick stacks of cash, numerous property documents registered in Marcellus's name, several passports bearing different stamps, and incriminating papers detailing the transfer of foundation land into private accounts. It was a clear blueprint of rampant corruption, yet it offered no direct proof of murder. With a tiny camera concealed within one of my buttons, I meticulously photographed each document, ensuring nothing remained unrecorded. Then, from the hallway, I heard the unmistakable sound of laughter and approaching footsteps. Panic, hot and suffocating, seized me like a sudden heat stroke. I swiftly closed the safe, hastily rehung the painting a little askew from my rush, and scrambled to hide behind a large sofa near the desk, feigning diligence in cleaning the baseboards. The door swung open. Marcellus entered, accompanied by a young woman impeccably dressed in a fitted gown and high heels. It was Soraya, his secretary, a woman I had always observed cultivating an uncomfortably close proximity to him. Shielded by the sofa's high back and the deep shadow of a filing cabinet, they remained oblivious to my presence. What I overheard next ignited a searing inferno within me. I violently slammed my shoulder against the door, desperately trying to break free, but the tie held me fast, too tight to budge. "You're not going to escape," I managed to rasp, my voice hoarse. "Shut up," he snarled back, his eyes wild. "I'm not going back to being poor. I'm not going to rot in jail. We're going far away. Do you understand, Amara? Far away." He abruptly veered onto an elevated viaduct that was still under construction. The ground was slick with recent rain, and the route constricted by concrete barriers. Ahead, the flashing lights of police cruisers formed an impenetrable blockade across our path. Marcellus violently yanked the wheel to avoid the barricade, but the car instantly lost traction, sending the world into a disorienting spin. The vehicle skidded uncontrollably, slammed broadside into the retaining wall, and crumpled upon impact. The airbags deployed with a deafening thud. I felt a sharp, sickening impact to my head and a searing pain in my temple. Dazed, I vaguely registered Marcellus next to me, his nose bleeding freely, one leg hopelessly pinned amidst the twisted wreckage of the dashboard. Yet, he continued to move. He lurched the door open and roughly pulled me out, his grip like iron bands around my wrists. Outside, the rain continued its relentless downpour. He dragged us perilously close to the viaduct's edge, where only a few precarious steps separated us from the abyss below. Beneath us, the dark, surging currents of an urban river roared ominously. Several squad cars converged around the wrecked vehicle, their weapons now aimed squarely at us. Marcellus held a jagged shard of broken glass against my neck, directly over my carotid artery. I felt the sharp point slice my skin, and a warm trickle of blood traced a path down my collarbone. The officers screamed at him, urging him to calm down, to release me. A police negotiator, speaking through a megaphone, began to try and buy precious time. I sat in the passenger seat, watching the rain hit the glass harder and harder. I felt the folded paper in the crease of my hijab as if it were a burning stone against my skin. I wanted to read it right there, but I was terrified Marcellus would notice. I glanced at him sideways. The man I had been married to for 10 years suddenly seemed like a complete, terrifying stranger. I replayed the last few months in my mind again. Zion's complaints of stomach pain, his sudden weakness, the long naps that were so uncharacteristic for a healthy child, and especially Marcellus's insistence that only the family's trusted doctor could treat him. Something horrible, a monstrous truth, was beginning to take shape in my mind. When we arrived home, the atmosphere was quieter, subdued. Most of the mourners had left. Only a few relatives remained, gathering chairs in the backyard. I said I felt dizzy and urgently needed to lie down. Marcellus offered to make me some hot tea, but I replied that I just wanted to sleep. I entered the bedroom, locked the door, and leaned my back against it, struggling to control my ragged breathing. I waited until I heard his footsteps moving away toward the kitchen. Then, with trembling hands, I retrieved the small paper hidden in my hijab. It was a page torn from a school notebook, covered with rushed, almost illegible handwriting. I read it under the dim light of the bedside lamp. Zion didn't have heart problems. They changed his medicine for low doses of poison. Check the teddy bear in his room. He recorded something before he died. Be careful. Your husband is dangerous. The world came crashing down on me with an earth-shattering force. My knees lost all strength, and I let myself fall to the floor. My baby, my little Zion, hadn't died of some mysterious illness. They had poisoned him, little by little, and the person who had done it was in my kitchen right now, making tea, meticulously pretending to be a shattered, grieving father. Marcellus bore no resemblance to a man in mourning. He was laughing casually with Soraya, pouring generous measures of whiskey into 2 glasses. She perched flirtatiously on the edge of the desk, gently stroking his arm. They spoke of Zion's death with a detached indifference, as if it were nothing more than the satisfactory closure of a profitable business deal. Soraya gushed about his perfect performance at the funeral, noting that even Mr. Sterling had been thoroughly impressed by his grieving father act. Marcellus, preening with self-satisfaction, declared that ridding himself of that sickly kid had been the most advantageous move for his future. He dismissed Zion as merely a burden, a constant drain on expenses that impeded the free flow of inheritance money into his eager hands. My nails dug savagely into my palms, leaving crescent-shaped indents. A primal urge to leap out and beat them senseless surged through me, but I knew such a move would be disastrous, a certain path to failure. Instead, I discreetly activated the tiny recording microphone hidden in my pants pocket, ensuring every despicable word of their conversation was captured. They idly discussed a planned trip to Europe, to be taken once everything calmed down and the millions officially landed in his account. They then turned their contemptuous attention to me, mocking my desperate flight. Marcellus sneered that it wouldn't take long for my corpse to be found lying around somewhere, and that everyone would simply assume I had succumbed to grief-induced madness. He labeled me weak, utterly useless, without him. And there's nothing they can prove, he added confidently, placing a possessive kiss on Soraya's temple. I already sent the poison bottle to be incinerated with the medical waste this morning. No trace left. That sentence struck me like a physical blow. The bottle, our crucial piece of hope, was now irrevocably gone. Marcellus, in a frenzy of delusion, shrieked demands for a helicopter, for money, for an unobstructed escape route. It was utterly absurd. He must have known there was no escape, yet he clung to that desperate fantasy like a drowning man to a flimsy branch. I heard his ragged breaths hot on my neck, the glass digging deeper into my throat. And yet, in that moment, My mind was flooded with a strange, unsettling serenity. My trembling ceased. I caught his distorted reflection in a murky puddle. The man I had once loved was utterly unrecognizable, a hollow shell devoured by ruthless ambition and raw fear. My thoughts flew to Zion, to his tiny body in that coffin, to Vanna plummeting from the third floor of the school. They hadn't had a choice. But I still did. I quickly darted my eyes to his feet. Marcellus's right leg was clearly and severely damaged. The ripped fabric of his pants exposed deep, gruesome wounds, blood mingling with grime and dirty water. That was his vulnerable point, his Achilles heel. I summoned every last ounce of strength I possessed. I took a deep, deliberate breath, heedless of the glass pressing further into the fresh cut on my neck. With a sudden, explosive movement, I whipped my head back and sank my teeth into the forearm holding the glass, channeling all my pent-up rage into the bite. I clamped down, grinding my teeth into his flesh until the metallic tang of blood filled my mouth. Marcellus let out a guttural, tearing scream. His hand reflexively spasmed, and the glass shard slipped from his suddenly slackened grip. Without a second's hesitation, I lifted my leg and slammed my foot with all my might into his already damaged knee. A horrible, sickening snap echoed across the viaduct. Marcellus's scream was even sharper, more primal than before, an almost inhuman howl of agony. His body instantly lost balance, and he toppled sideways onto the soaked pavement, writhing in excruciating pain. The unbearable pain that had torn me apart until then transformed into something harder and sharper. Rage. My tears dried up instantly, replaced by a cold fury. I understood that crying could wait. What couldn't wait was the unvarnished truth. I got up as best I could and tiptoed out of the room, heading to Zion's bedroom, which was next to the master suite. I opened the door carefully. The comforting smell of baby cologne and lotion still floated in the air, so familiar it shrank my heart with a fresh wave of grief. Everything was just as he had left it, the building blocks on the floor, the superhero posters on the walls, the storybooks scattered on the nightstand. Sitting on the bed was his big brown teddy bear, the one he hugged every night to sleep, the cherished gift I had given him 2 years ago for his birthday. I approached the bear and caressed its soft fur with shaking hands. I noticed something strange on its back, a seam that was a bit thick, as if someone had opened and closed it in a hurry with clumsy stitches. I remembered that he had been taught to sew at school and sometimes practiced on his toys. I went to the desk, opened a drawer, and took out a nail clipper with a small metal file. I went back to the bear and started to unstitch it carefully. Amidst the white fiber stuffing appeared a small digital recorder, a spy toy that my friend Khalil had given him a long time ago. Zion loved playing detective. I felt a chill pierce me to the bone as I pressed the play button. Zion's voice sounded weak and hoarse, a stark contrast to the cheerful one that used to fill the house. Today, my tummy hurt again after Dad gave me the red medicine. It tastes really bitter, not like the one Mom gives me. I'm scared to tell Mom. Then Dad gets mad, like that one time. Dad says it's a super vitamin to make me strong, but I feel worse every time. The audio continued with the distinct sound of a door opening and heavy footsteps approaching. Yet, in its place, we had secured something equally potent, an arrogant admission. The damning confession that they believed they had utterly triumphed. When they finally departed for lunch, I remained in my hiding spot for several tense minutes, ensuring the coast was absolutely clear. Before I left, I retrieved the small toy car Zion used to carry everywhere in his backpack, a poignant memento I had held onto since the previous night. I carefully placed it in the center of Marcellus's immaculately organized desk files, a chilling message that his past was indeed coming for him. Back at the apartment, Khalil and I listened to the recording together. Khalil was so consumed by contained fury that he had to step out onto the balcony to smoke, lest he simply explode. He recognized the audio's devastating power, but also the critical flaw. It was an illegally obtained recording, which they could easily attempt to dismiss in court. Our new strategy demanded that they publicly incriminate themselves, betraying each other in front of witnesses, cameras, and microphones. The most effective way to compel a criminal to make mistakes, we concluded, was to unleash fear. And we knew that Marcellus, despite his icy demeanor, harbored a singular vulnerability, a deep-seated terror of the supernatural, of karma, of retribution from forces beyond his control. Years ago, in the early days of our marriage, he had confessed his profound dread of ghost stories, his obsession with the notion that evil deeds inevitably returned, magnified. He had tried to suppress that fear with cynicism and an insatiable pursuit of wealth, but it remained, a festering wound beneath his veneer of control. Khalil, with his exceptional hacking skills, had successfully infiltrated the smart home system of our former residence. Lights, security cameras, audio controls, air conditioning, everything Marcellus had installed to cultivate his illusion of safety would now be weaponized against him. I scrambled away, stumbling precariously, but finally free of his terrifying hold. The police swiftly capitalized on the sudden chaos. Several officers sprinted towards us, pulling me away from the treacherous edge of the bridge. Others pounced on Marcellus, who was still flailing, kicking, and desperately trying to grasp at anything within reach. One of the officers was forced to shoot him in his other leg when Marcellus attempted to snatch his weapon. Everything dissolved into a bewildering, chaotic blur, a cacophony of voices, blinding lights, and grasping hands. They gently sat me on the cold ground, then quickly wrapped me in a thermal blanket. A paramedic pressed sterile gauze firmly over the gash on my neck. I remained silent. I simply watched, numbly, as they lifted Marcellus onto a stretcher, now handcuffed, bleeding profusely, and utterly disfigured by his ordeal. As they carried him past me, our eyes locked one last time. There was no longer a trace of arrogance, nor superiority, nor hatred in his gaze, only raw, unadulterated fear. Perhaps, in that moment, for the very first time, he truly understood that everything was finally over. Khalil arrived soon after, his arm in a sling, his face visibly bruised. He navigated the chaos as best he could, finally wrapping his uninjured arm tightly around me. In that instant, I finally surrendered, allowing the tears to flow freely. But these weren't merely tears of pain, they were tears of profound relief as well. The following day, news reports extensively detailed the intricate web of corruption and murder that entangled Marcellus and Mr. Sterling. Fragments of damning recordings were leaked. Images of the humiliating scandal at the gala, followed by photos of both men in handcuffs, swiftly circulated. Public opinion, once swayed by their power, vehemently turned against them. The district attorney wasted no time in taking decisive action. Their bank accounts were immediately frozen, and all their assets seized. Then I clearly heard Marcellus's voice talking on the phone with someone. His tone was calm, chillingly detached, almost bored. "Don't worry, Mr. Sterling. I already upped the dose. The kid won't make it to next week. As soon as he dies, his grandfather's inheritance is released to the guardian's account, meaning mine. Then we split it 50-50 like we agreed. You just make sure the paperwork for the foundation property is ready to change names." The recording abruptly cut off. The silence in the room became deafening, an unbearable void. I covered my mouth with both hands to contain a scream that was fighting desperately to escape my throat. Everything was spinning. My husband, the man with whom I had shared 10 years of my life, had poisoned our son to claim the inheritance money my father had left in Zion's name. And the respectable Mr. Sterling, president of the Educational Foundation, was his wicked accomplice. They were monsters, not men. At that instant, the doorknob of the room began to jiggle. Someone was trying to enter, but I had locked it. "Amara." I heard Marcellus's voice on the other side. "Why is the door locked? Are you in there? Open it." His tone was no longer that of a sweet, grieving husband. There was hardness, suspicion, a veiled, terrifying threat. He banged on the door insistently. "Open up, Amara. Don't make me break it down." I backed away, clutching the bear and the recorder against my chest. I was trapped. My son's killer was on the other side of that door. And the most terrifying part was that he knew I already knew his horrific secret. The blows against the door became brutal, relentless. Each impact made the pictures on the wall vibrate violently. Marcellus was screaming my name, his voice disfigured by pure rage and panic, a roar that mixed desperation and unspeakable cruelty. I knew that as soon as he managed to get in, my life would be hanging by the thinnest of threads. Marcellus was no longer my husband. We would use it to systematically dismantle his sanity. That very night, the haunting commenced. From the laptop screen, we observed him via the living room camera. He poured himself drink after drink, visibly uneasy, fiddling with Zion's toy car, the one mysteriously left on his office desk. At the stroke of midnight, Khalil made the living room lights flicker erratically. Marcellus rose, disoriented, and went to inspect the switches. When he seemed to regain some composure, he ascended to the bedroom. We remotely lowered the air conditioning temperature to a frigid 60 degrees Fahrenheit. We watched him shiver uncontrollably in bed, uncovered. Then, through the ceiling speakers, we played a faint, childlike giggle, Zion's, subtly interwoven with the innocuous white noise of the fan. Marcellus sat bolt upright, eyes wide with terror, frantically searching for the source of the sound. He called out, his voice trembling, "Who's there?" We instantly cut the audio. We meticulously repeated this psychological torment over the subsequent nights, gradually escalating the intensity. We ensured he never slept for more than fleeting moments at a time. By the third day, as he was showering, we flooded the bathroom with the chilling recording of Zion's pained whimpers from when his stomach hurt, that same fragment that had also been preserved on the small recorder. The natural echo off the tiled surfaces amplified the sound, rendering it truly spectral. Marcellus burst out of the bathroom, slipping frantically, clutching at furniture, dripping wet, and with his face a ghastly marble white. He began to shriek, demanding to be left alone, insisting it wasn't possible. His next desperate move was to blame Soraya. He began calling her compulsively, his voice laced with frantic accusations of her playing cruel, elaborate jokes. A seed of profound mistrust was thus expertly sown between them. However, the legal repercussions were merely a fraction of their ultimate reckoning. Life, or perhaps a cruel twist of fate, administered the rest. In the prison hospital where Marcellus was confined, doctors made a grim discovery. The leg he had crushed in the accident had become severely infected. The noxious combination of glass shards, mud, and asphalt debris had introduced virulent bacteria into his bloodstream. In a matter of mere hours, the tissue began to rapidly rot. To save his life, they were left with no alternative but to amputate his right leg above the knee. Upon waking from the anesthesia, Marcellus was confronted with the horrifying reality that he would never walk normally again. He cried, he screamed, he pleaded desperately for them to restore what he had lost. It was a brutal, poetic irony. He, who had so callously destroyed his own son's body, systematically damaging his organs with poison, now faced the mutilation of his own flesh. Confined to that hospital bed, eventually bound to a wheelchair, the very man who had once believed himself invincible, who had so contemptuously looked down upon the weak, now found himself irrevocably transformed into the very thing he despised most. Mr. Sterling, too, did not emerge unscathed. During his initial formal statement at the district attorney's office, the intense pressure caused his blood pressure to spike dangerously. He suffered a massive, debilitating stroke. He survived the ordeal, but half his body was left permanently paralyzed. The charismatic man who once dominated stages with his moving speeches, who effortlessly manipulated politicians and businessmen with his slick, persuasive talk, was now reduced to making unintelligible sounds, drooling helplessly, and confined to a bed in the prison infirmary. His vast assets were confiscated. His family, overcome with shame, disavowed him entirely. He was a cornered animal, willing to destroy anything that could expose him. I tucked the recorder into the inner pocket of my tunic. It was the only tangible proof I now had to demand justice. I had to find another way out. The door was out of the question. Only the window remained. Zion's room was on the second floor. I remembered the sycamore tree growing next to the house, with its thick, sturdy branches reaching quite close to the room's small balcony. More than once I had scolded Zion for daring to climb it. Now that childish mischief could very well save my life. I ran to the window, unlocked the latch with trembling hands, and threw it wide open. The night air, heavy and damp with rain, hit my face like a bucket of ice water. Outside, the storm had intensified. Lightning illuminated the garden for split seconds, stark and brief. Thunder masked the furious blows Marcellus was dealing to the door. The sickening cracking of wood warned me the door wouldn't hold much longer. Without giving myself time to think, I climbed onto the balcony railing and felt for a branch of the tree with my foot. It was wet and dangerously slippery, but it was that or die in there. I launched myself, clinging to the branch with both hands. The rough bark scratched my palms, but I held on with desperate strength. My soaked tunic got caught on a thin branch. The ultimate phase of our plan was timed to coincide with the Foundation's annual gala, an extravagant affair hosted at a luxury hotel. Mr. Sterling was slated to deliver a keynote speech, and Marcellus was to be publicly honored with an award as an exemplary father for his continued support of the institution, despite the recent tragedy. The very title of this recognition twisted my stomach. Khalil, leveraging his remarkable technical acumen, located a breach in the hotel's Wi-Fi network and successfully gained access to their projection and sound systems. The Foundation had planned an emotional video montage featuring photos of Zion. We, however, prepared a vastly different one, a devastating compilation of their own moral decay. On the night of the event, Khalil and I observed everything from the interior of a discreet van parked in the hotel lot, its multiple screens displaying feeds from the hotel's security cameras. We watched as Marcellus entered alongside Mr. Sterling. Marcellus appeared utterly broken, haggard and hunched, constantly turning his head as if haunted by the fear of a specter at his back. Soraya was also present, looking beautiful but clearly annoyed, a captive audience to his unpredictable mood swings. He became utterly dependent on the hands of strangers, even for the most basic acts of eating and personal hygiene. It was the complete and utter demolition of his monumental pride. Soraya, Marcellus's secretary and mistress, made a desperate attempt to flee. She was apprehended at the airport, trying to escape the country with a substantial amount of jewelry and cash, just moments before investigators could reach her. Without a moment's hesitation, she betrayed Marcellus, handing over damning records of illicit transfers and compromising emails. She naively believed this would reduce her own sentence, but she could not escape accountability for her active collaboration in the cover-up and her personal financial gain. Ultimately, she was sentenced to 20 years in prison. In jail, far from the world of expensive suits and luxury hotels, her once prized beauty ceased to be a privilege and instead became a constant target for envy and aggression. Khalil and I tracked the unfolding news with a complex mix of grim satisfaction, lingering rage, and profound exhaustion. We never celebrated their suffering, yet neither did we feel an ounce of pity for them. Nothing they endured could ever truly compare to the agonizing pain of a child poisoned by his own father, or the sheer terror of a dedicated teacher thrown from a third floor for daring to speak the truth. However, at the very least, they were finally no longer untouchable.